Not dead, not finished. In 1911, whilst many expected the end of Henry Royce, he was being carried thousands of miles away to the heat and dust of Egypt, because one man refused to let him fade.
I've got sand in my +4.
Claude Johnson, the power behind Rolls Royce, knew that if Royce survived, everything could change. And in the silence of the desert, far from factories and failure, a new chapter began. One that would take Rolls Royce from the road to the skies. Friend and colleague Claude Johnson, the self-named hyphen between Rolls and Royce, persuaded Royce to join him on an extended road trip to, if nothing else, get him away from the pollution and pressures of Derby. The pair would journey across Europe to Egypt, and they spent the winter under the warm sun and clear blue skies of the African continent. In the spring they journeyed back through Europe and found themselves overnighting in a motel at Le Canadel on the Côte d'Azur in the south of France. Sampling the delights of Le Canadel, Royce almost immediately decided that he needed a home in the area. He instructed Johnson to buy some land and organise the building of 4 properties of his own design. One was for Royce, Villa Mimosa, another for Johnson, Villa Jaune, and the third was to be a place for Royce to work, and the fourth would accommodate house staff and visitors from England, of which there would ultimately be many. Once the complex was complete, Royce would spend every winter until his death in the benign and restful climate of Le Canadel. On Royce's return to Blighty after his mammoth road trip with Johnson, he would undergo major surgery in London. This was rumoured to be as a result of bowel cancer, with the operation thought to be the first colostomy procedure undertaken in the UK. Although the operation was deemed a success, Royce's doctors suggested that he would live only a few more months following their drastic interventions. This news seemed to usher in a period of recalibration and adjustment for Royce. He and Minnie would finally part ways in 1912, with Mrs. Royce remaining in their marital home in Quorndon, just outside Derby. Claude Johnson engaged the services of a private nurse for his friend and boss Royce, one Ethel Oban. Given the perilous state of Royce's health, the erstwhile Johnson forbade him from returning to the industrialised Midlands, and most especially to the Derby factory. Johnson would secure a property for Royce and Nurse Oban in St Margaret's Bay in Kent, and Royce would almost immediately start working again, this time approximately 100 years ahead of the rest of us, from home. Royce, of course, confounded his doctors and soon returned to a functional level of health. Within a few years, Royce would spot a property that took his interest while thumbing through a copy of Country Life. Elmstead in West Wittering, Sussex, was purchased in 1917, and Royce and Nurse Oban would share their time between here and Villa Mimosa for the rest of Royce's life. If this sounded like a restful, even idyllic retirement, nothing was much further from the truth. At Elmstead, Royce had a design office attached to the house and acquired another one further down the lane called Camacha to accommodate the various designers and draftsmen making the regular pilgrimage from Derby. In Le Canadel, a design office called Le Bureau was established, meaning that Royce could ply his workaholic ways at all times of the year. With his health confoundingly somewhat restored and all the necessary arrangements made for remote working, Royce could press on developing his business, or so he thought. Of course, in 1914 the outbreak of the First World War would stymie Royce's plans and sent his business in a tangentially different direction. As far back as 1909, Charles Rolls had been entreating Royce to design an aero engine. Royce hadn't been too excited by the prospect, and old cautious Claremont was of course dead set against it. With Britain now at war, pressure was coming from more impactful directions, with His Majesty's government urging Rolls-Royce to tender for the production of Renault-designed aero engines. This time the board capitulated and the company ended up winning the government contract. Needless to say, Royce was dissatisfied with the Renault engine and promptly created an improved version. The first example of the Eagle engine ran in early 1915 and thereby set a precedent for all Rolls-Royce aero engines to be named after birds of prey. Ultimately, over 4,600 Eagle engines were built, and Falcon and Hawk derivatives would soon follow. By the end of the Great War, Rolls-Royce were emphatically and inextricably in the aero engine business. Unlike Claremont, the late Charles Rolls would have been thrilled to have his name associated with a peerless and illustrious range of engines for aircraft. Royce seemed to remain strangely ambivalent to his designs and flight in general. It is widely known and accepted that Royce never flew in an aircraft of any type. Quite remarkable. Post-World War I was a period of consolidation for Rolls-Royce and personal growth for Royce. The roll call of sublime cars would continue, with Silver Ghost production recommencing in 1919 and the 20, 20-25 and Phantom all following along. Royce would buy a 60-acre parcel of land adjacent to Elmstead and spend what spare time he had in learning land management and animal husbandry techniques with the same level of diligence and attention to detail that he brought to his every endeavour. Other remarkable aero engines would follow, of course. While strolling on the beach of West Wittering with a group of his engineers, Royce sketched a design of the new R engine with a tip of his cane in the wet sand. This engine would form the basis of the legendary Merlin engine, named for the small Falcon rather than the fictional wizard that would become so instrumental in the development of the Hurricane and Spitfire warplanes. By now, Rolls-Royce had lost its figurative hyphen, if not its typographical one. The supportive and thoroughly able Claude Johnson passed away in 1926 at the age of 61. Johnson succumbed to pneumonia, and his loss must have been another significant blow to the physically fragile Royce. Despite these challenges, Royce had one last corporate manoeuvre up his well-tailored sleeves. Ever since W.O. Bentley had founded his eponymous firm in 1919, it had been an irritating thorn in Royce's side. Bentley's numerous racing successes, combined with a range of refined and luxurious road cars, created a sporting mark that many a traditional Rolls-Royce buyer would find attractive. By the early 1930s, however, the global depression had holed Bentley's finances below the waterline. Bentley was placed into administration and put up for sale by sealed bid auction. W.O. was confident that his friends at Napier Engineering would step up and rescue his beloved firm. In the event, however, a mysterious buyer called the British Central Equitable Trust placed the winning bid of £125,000. Ultimately, the trust turned out to be a front for a company set up by Royce to avoid the chance of Bentley somehow vetoing the fiscal advances of his most prominent and long-standing rival. In 1933, the first Bentley produced under Rolls-Royce ownership was launched in the form of the Bentley 3.5 litre, a sports-orientated iteration of the Rolls-Royce 20/25. Rolls-Royce marketed the model as the silent sports car, and it was widely admired. Even W.O. Bentley himself was quoted as saying, "Taking all things into consideration, I'd rather own this Bentley than any other car produced under that name." Praise indeed. Royce, of course, now completely bedridden at Elmstead, felt the car needed adjustable shock absorbers to make it the best it could be. With a table set up over his bed, Royce would sketch designs for the required part. The final sketches bear annotation in both Royce's and Nurse Oban's hand, with the great man being too frail to write for himself at times. Nurse Oban was dispatched with the drawings and instructions to make sure the boys at Derby get this. On her return, a couple of hours later, she discovered Royce's lifeless body with a sketching pencil still in his hand. The date was the 22nd of April 1933. Frederick Henry Royce was 70 years old. In short order, Royce was quickly cremated at the Golders Green Crematorium in London. Royce would have neither flowers nor mourners at his funeral. Only 2 people attended his funeral, Royce's solicitor, Albert Claremont, brother of cautious Ernest, and a Mr. Tildesley who worked for Albert. Royce's ashes were returned to Nurse Oban initially, and later placed in an urn beneath the bust of him in the Rolls Royce factory in Derby. Ultimately, the urn was taken back to Alwalton to be buried in the church in the village where he was born. The bulk of Royce's estate, valued at £112,000, roughly £10 million in today's terms, and his Elmstead home were left to Nurse Oban. 1/10 of his estate was left in charitable trust for the purpose of improving the health of and preventing disease to the human race. Within a year of Royce's death, his solicitor Albert Claremont would also die. His assistant, and the only other mourner at Royce's funeral, Mr. Tildesley, would replace Claremont as executor, and strangely go on to marry Ethel Oban. The marriage was seemingly a sham on Tildesley's part, with the couple living separately within months. The marriage would ultimately result in a 1959 court case where Ethel would contest Tildesley's benefit by marriage under the terms of the will. The outcome of said case seems to have been lost in the mists of time, however. Sadly, Henry, like his partner Charles Rolls, would die without producing any heirs. What of Royce the man then? Well, a clue to his motivations can be found in his famous maxim, "Strive for perfection in everything you do. Take the best that exists and make it better." Phew, that sounds exhausting. Another of his quotations reveals the apparent torment of the man. Towards the end of his life, he rued that, "My main regret is that I didn't work harder." Presumably 25 hours a day and 8 days a week rather than the usual work-shy 24/7. I imagine that this relentless drive was the key to his surviving the various significant challenges to his health, as well as providing a frustration to those mere mortals in his employ. An early employee at the Cook Street Works was schooled on how to better utilise his broom on one occasion.
Bloody cheek.
No prizes for guessing where he probably felt like sticking said broom. And prospective cooks were tested to see if they knew how to boil potatoes properly. Royce seems like a modest man, however. Despite his myriad triumphs and achievements, he would routinely refer to himself as a mechanic, even after his ennoblement to the position of Baronet of Seaton in the county of Rutland in 1930 for his services to British aviation. Charles Rolls would have loved that part.
Splendid.
Given how extraordinary both Rolls and Royce were as men, it can hardly be a surprise that their company endures well over 100 years later as an automotive shorthand for excellence, peerless quality and prestige. More than that, however, their name and mark transcends the confines of automotive achievement to become a synonym for an apogee of quality, such as the Rolls Royce of pianos or the Rolls Royce of watches. The fact that neither Rolls nor Royce would live to witness the outbreak of the Second World War makes this achievement all the more remarkable. I can't help feeling a little sad for Henry, however. I think he looks a little sad in many of his photographs, and perhaps his loveless marriage and notable lack of progeny was a recurring source of silent regret for him. History remains stum about whether or not he would find romantic fulfilment with his nurse Ethel. Even if not, and I for one would wish that for him, he certainly found companionship and empathy with Ethel remaining at his side for over 20 years. His reoccurring health concerns, though no particular fault of his own, must have proved incredibly frustrating for a man who felt he had so much to achieve. My abiding feeling about Henry Royce, however, is that if his is not the archetype of a great automotive life, then no one's is. Thanks so much for listening. Make sure you subscribe and follow to not miss any future episodes of my Great Automotive Live videos. Look forward to seeing you next time. Happy motoring.